Today we're going to look at the brand new lineup of TaylorMade drivers for 2024, and the red face isn't here anymore. Before we get stuck into this review though guys, do make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and you don't miss any of the reviews that we have coming out, because it is release season and we have lots of information to pass on to you to help you make better choices and maybe save a few pounds when buying your new clubs. Let's get stuck into it. That is right, you heard me correctly. The red face is not going to feature in the new line of TaylorMade drivers, and that lineup is QI10. I'll get to the name a little bit later on. But as we look at these drivers, they have three models that are coming out this year in 2024, being the QI10, the QI10 Max, and the QI10 LS. Now also they do have an offering in an HL version in the QI10 Max, but we're going to focus on the three other models that I've just mentioned. When we look at the three models that we're going to be looking at today, it's pretty standard from TaylorMade. We saw this last time from the Stealth 2, we saw a standard, we saw a HD, we saw a Plus model, and that is pretty much mirrored in this QI10 launch. Now, firstly, the QI10, this would be the driver, I would say, that is probably the everybody driver. It's for whether you're swinging it fast, whether you're swinging it mid, whether you're swinging it a little bit slower, high launch, low launch. It sort of does everything. It's aimed at that, everybody on the golf market, and you can have it fitted and tailored to you in that way. The QI10 Max is aimed at your maybe slightly higher handicapper, a golfer that is maybe swinging the golf club a little bit slower, who wants maybe a little bit more forgiveness from their driver. They're trying to see straighter drivers. And that's where this QI is coming in, and I will get to the tech on that shortly. And then we have the LS model, and this is for your fast swing speeds, your lower spins, and your more distance. This is probably more for your better player, I would say. The driver that, if you're finding the middle a little bit more consistently and you want to see a little bit more from your driver, you probably want to go down the LS model. So in hand, one of the things, as I said earlier, there's no red face. And when we actually see this driver, when you see the head cover and when you actually see the club heads in hand or behind the golf ball, I think for me, the word that I would use would be classic. It looks a lot more like a classic driver, what we've seen from the past. Now, it's still got the carbon face, but what they've done is gone for a navy or dark blue face here. So it looks a lot more subtle as opposed to the red face. You could see it. It was drawing everyone into it. It was the first time we were seeing carbon wood from TaylorMade when we had the red one, so it needed to stand out as where it's still there. People know about it, so they've just toned back a little bit on it. And for me, having this sort of more classic look about it, the colorway being dark navy, almost looks black on the top, and then a little bit of silver and a tiny bit of yellow on the bottom or gold, it just looks a little bit more pleasing. It's not as in your face. And I think from the red face to where they are now, I would probably hesitate a guess that the red face maybe divided quite a lot of people, whether they were going to have it in the bag or they weren't, because of how it looked. Even something as trivial as football teams or sports teams, because of the red face, you might not have wanted that because of the team you sported. But even the head cover, I think, looks a lot better. And overall, in hand, and even when you put this behind the golf ball, it just looks a lot more polished to me. It looks a lot better. There is a change as well to the top of the club face and the top of the crown, which I'll get onto in a second about the technology. But overall, before I even hit these golf clubs, for me, it's a tick on how they're looking and how they're actually presenting themselves. I think they'll actually turn a lot more people back onto this range of TaylorMade clubs just by that colorway. The price is also something that we need to take into consideration, and it's come down a little bit, which is another great factor. QI10 Max and the QI10 standard version, RRP, £499, which is probably mid $500. The LS version, that RRP, $529, so probably just into the high $500 mark. And I would expect when they actually hit stores, they will be lower than that, so maybe £450 for the QI10 and the QI10 Max, and then £499 for the LS, so keeping it under that £500 mark and a little bit cheaper than some of the other big brands. That's got to be a positive, and that's something that we like to see, that we're saving a few pounds and actually hopefully getting an improved driver. Now let's talk tech, because if you didn't have the QI10 logos on here and we took away the colour scheme, you could be forgiven for just saying that is a Stealth 2, because they do look very similar when you're looking at the base, the sole of the club. Particularly in the LS model, which was the Plus model in the Stealth, we see that movable weight port up near the front of the driver. We see a weight that is fixed at the back. We're seeing the speed pocket up at the front, but it's actually what they've done throughout the club heads, which is where the QI10 name has come from. And I'm going to turn to the QI10 Max, because this is where the 10 actually features. So the QI10, and where this differs from Stealth 2, is quest for inertia and 10. Now 10 is 10,000, and that is the rate of the moment of inertia. And for those watching who don't know what moment of inertia is, summarize it basically, it's the amount of twist that you have at impact. So when a ball hits the club face, how stable is that club face? Because if you're towing and heeling top or bottom, the club is going to be subject to some twist from off-centered strike. So if we can limit the amount of twist, we should see that the face is squarer to our target, and we should see balls that are actually starting to go straighter. And this is a story that we'll see in another brand as well, are actually going for this 10k number. This one, the Stealth Max, is the driver out of the three that features this 10k moment of inertia. So they're saying that the QI10 is going to be the most forgiving driver they have ever made. And the reasoning and how they've managed to do this is all to do in the construction of the head. Now, what they've managed to do, and one of the things that I alluded to earlier, is how it looks from the top. And what we see is that as you look down on the actual clubs now, when you put them in behind the golf ball, before we used to see almost like a little bit of a bracket or an outline of where the carbon crown would be and where it would meet the titanium, as where we hardly see this at all on these drivers now. And that is because the carbon crown has gone to 97% of the crown structure. It's increased quite significantly from previous models. So as you look down on it now, you almost can't see anything. What they've also been able to do, because of now using more carbon up at the top, it means then that they're able to distribute weight more towards the back and lower in the Max driver, adding a 30 gram weight to the back to increase the CTR, which again is feeding back into making this driver one of the most stable and one of the most forgiving drivers. Also, the head shape on the Max, this driver, as you put the three drivers down side by side, especially when you're going from top to bottom, Max to LS, it almost looks twice the size of the LS. When you look through them, it looks like you've got a 3-wood down at the LS compared to what the Max is. It's still a 460cc head, but because of the structure now, they've been able to stretch the footprint of the driver to make it appear bigger while still staying in those limitations. And like I said, as you go back through the drivers, they almost look smaller and smaller. And that again is because as we look at the three drivers, what we're looking at is most forgiveness to almost less forgiveness, still forgiving, but we're looking at less forgiveness. One thing that you would probably think that you would lose from a forgiving driver is speed, because we don't really think as safe and forgiving as speedy. We would think it as maybe a little bit slower, but because of the construction of the head with the 60 times carbon face that they've got, the 60 times layer, they've actually been able to actually change the thickness of the face now at different points throughout the face, again trying to deliver maximum ball speeds off-centered hits, so you get the ability of having that 10k MOI while still having a fast face, thus joining speed and forgiveness together, hopefully producing one of the straightest and fastest drivers we should see on the market. But that is all talk. That is all what they are claiming. Is it actually going to prevail? Well, what I want to do is get these down onto the golf course, give them a hit and see where we're at, because for me, the Max one is the one I'm most interested in. Is it actually going to be forgiving? Is stretching this MOI out to 10K going to see that we get a straight driver? So I've had an initial hit down at the golf course, and I have to say, I'm impressed, but I'm also not blown away. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. I'm not blown away because the QI10 did exactly what I thought it would do. I actually had a fitting later on last year with TaylorMade's Chris Trott, and I ended up in a standard Stealth 2. And that driver did pretty much what I saw from last ones. I would say I felt maybe a tiny bit straighter out on the golf course with it. Nothing that was astronomically, oh my gosh, I'm hitting this long and I'm hitting every single fairway. But I didn't feel like I was getting some of the wild shots that I saw from the original Stealth, maybe the Stealth 2 Plus. But it did what I expected. It felt good, it sounded good, it definitely looks a lot better behind the golf ball. And on initial test, like I say, yeah, I thought it was going to do what it did. The LS model, I'm a little bit intrigued by, because there was still that little bit of untamed beast feel about it. This driver, as I found with that fitting with Chris Trott last year, probably isn't the one for me. It's not the model that I ended up being fit with. But I noticed that on some of them, definitely there was some long shots out there. When I got down to them on the fairway, they were sort of past the point where I would normally be thinking they would be out on the golf course. There was the odd one that if I didn't quite get it, I felt I lost. But what I saw from Stealth 2 as well, I didn't feel like I had the real wild shot in there where it just dove, there was wild spins. So that improvement that we saw from the face of Stealth 2 definitely carried on to the QI10, and I think it's just upped its game a little bit. I think this one is a little bit more forgiving than the Plus model from Stealth 2, but not wildly blown away by this one as well, the QI10. That being said, when we get to the QI10 Max, this one was interesting. It inspired so much confidence when I put it down behind the golf ball. It looks, like I say, almost twice the size it feels like. You feel like you can't miss this driver when you put it down. The footprint, the way it sits behind it, it looks big. And then in terms of a flight perspective, probably the straightest driver I've ever hit. Out on the golf course, it wasn't the longest noted to these two. I was maybe feeling like I was getting a bit more spin with it, but I definitely noticed I was finding more fairways. I was confident with my swing because of how it looked behind the golf ball. I felt like I struck it pretty solid and it just felt straight. There wasn't loads of movement in the air. It was sort of aimed down the middle and just put a swing on it and it pretty much goes there. There wasn't any real wild curvature that I've seen with other drivers. And this is the one, the Quest for Inertia with that 10,000 MOI, doing what it said on the tin out on the golf course. It was quite interesting to see. So I'm suitably impressed with that. But what I want to do is head back into my studio now and get them on the sim, get some data and actually find out how these drivers are going to perform. So will the data show what I was seeing out on the golf course? We're going to start off middle of the road, the QI10. Now for me, this is probably the driver I would end up being fit into. It was good. It was very, very good. I felt pretty straight with it, which I was seeing out on the golf course. Spin number was where we wanted it to be, in that 2000 category, 2700-ish number. And then the distance, 296 yards of carry. I felt with this one, I was just getting it going, and there wasn't that many wild swings. And I think the good thing as well with it was on the heel to toe shots, my miss being a low heel, the spin went up a bit, but it wasn't dropping off wildly. They were only round about the 275 mark, but pretty straight when I was hitting those shots. When I got some a little bit higher and out of the toe, the spin dropped ever so slightly, and I was seeing drives that were carrying comfortably over the 300-yard mark. That's the QI10, so that one was a big tick for me in how that performed out there. I was happy with distance, I was happy with dispersion, overall good. When we go to this one, the LS, now from this driver, I think I might have found the longest driver I have ever tested. Its spin was a little bit on the low side, but again, it probably wouldn't be the driver I was going for, but it came in just under 2,000 revs of spin. I'd like to see it a tiny bit higher, but its carry was 310 yards. Now that being said, the distance was phenomenal, but the direction, when I didn't quite catch it, when it was a little bit toe and heely, it still was going, but it was going a little bit off the planet. It was going a little bit too far right and a little bit too far left for my liking when I was in the sim. I saw the odd shot like that out on the golf course, but nothing that was really, really wild. But, you know, over time, would I straighten that out? Who knows? But if you're looking for a low spin distance driver, that was definitely ticking the box. Now the QI10 Max, this is the one, like I said earlier, that has that 10,000 number of MOI. And for me, it has to be the straightest driver I have tested thus far. When I got it back in the sim, yes, it wasn't the longest. It was 277 yards of carry, spinning up into the 3,000 RPM number. But I'm expecting that. I'm not expecting this to be super long. And as we can see, when we go from one end to the other, the distance went up as we went up the scale, but also the QI10 Max was the tightest of them all. And at 277, when I actually got the heel, when I got the toe, when I got the top and bottom, I found that it was actually a tighter drop off. They were only falling around about 260, 265 on the poor strikes. But overall, when actually testing it, I've never felt like I've hit a driver straighter than I have that QI10 Max. So very, very impressed. And I think, like I said earlier, I have found the longest and the straightest driver that I have tested thus far. So that's your TaylorMade lineup for 2024. Go and try them out, get fit, importantly, test them out and see if these drivers are any good for you. I've been impressed by that Max. That has really blown me away in how straight I've hit it, and then the distance with the LS. I've not seen stuff like that before. Overall, I think a better looking driver. It's performing, it's doing what it says on the tin. Definitely one that you should give a go in 2024. Guys, hope you've enjoyed the video. As we said earlier, make sure you subscribe, click it down below so you don't miss any reviews coming out in the near future.